Time has come, yes. Right,
welcome. Wait, we need the slides. We're not talking about Ubuntu, sorry, for those of you who thought we were. It's a great operating system, however, yeah? I think I'm right, there we go.
Yep, so welcome to the very first of the talks after the keynotes. I hope you're all alert, awake, ready, and hopefully full of coffee, because, you know, coffee. And
and how many of you are expecting us to have a list of the useful, the scrap heap, and the broken? In terms of, oh yes, that gentleman back there, I like that. Okay, well, we'll see. Let's see what we have.
Well, we get lists.
Okay. So look at all of these different types of connectors. Before we start talking about open source networking, I think it's useful to look back at the history of networking. How many of you remember these types of connectors? You've all used these? Some people have used
And how many of you lot have these in your garage?
Yes.
Yep, that feels very familiar.
Yes. Yes. So the point of this slide is that, you know, much like most things, nothing in networking lasts forever as well. Technologies, they move on. Occasionally we make the wrong choices with technology, but things move on. Networking moves forward just like the rest of the technology.
Yep, and that's true of software just the same as hardware. So what was a good idea 5 years ago or 10 years ago may not be the right idea today. So we have to appreciate that as we write code, it's got an expiry date, that ultimately most things, they have a season, they have a life, and they have a death as well.
Right. So, let's fast forward. Any Doctor Who fans in the audience? That has to be so. Oh my gosh! Did that man wins a prize?
Absolutely.
You brought the prize, right?
No.
Talk to Ian after the talk. We'll figure it out for you.
The prize is I steal your T-shirt because I forgot mine this week.
Yeah, so. that works too. So you know, jumping forward to the future, right? Open source networking problems we have solved, things that we've solved, right?
Yes, we have to look at where we're trying to take the world before we're actually going to get there. Otherwise, it's like driving a car with your eyes shut.
If you don't know where you're going,
I
you can do
recommend
it.
not doing, but you know, it's good fun all the same.
Yeah, it helps to know where you're going before you kick it into high gear and just start driving. At least we found that to be helpful. So, you know, in 5 years' time, what do we want open source networking to be 5 years from now? You know, perhaps these things.
Yeah.
I think.
But I think practically the more important thing to take from this is not these are the problems we have to solve. It's the point that is that the problems we're seeing today are the problems we want to fade into the background in the future. The thing that solves our problems in the future is to basically get rid of the low-lying bits so that we can start building more exciting stuff in the future. We can use what we've done and we can build upon it. We can be looking further forward to solving more abstract problems. And one way in which we do that is we make sure we pick the right open source projects now to work on so that we don't spread ourselves incredibly thinly and we don't get anything accomplished.
That last bit is key, picking the right projects to work on. Right. So this kind of leads into that, I guess, perhaps as well. In the future, you know, we don't want to duplicate work. Do we want to duplicate work? No, we definitely don't. We've done that in the past, I think. We've duplicated work.
May have done just once or twice, yes.
Yes. And this goes to your point to what you were saying about commoditization at the lower layers. That's going to provide us that capability to innovate at the higher layers. Yeah. We're not reinventing anything here, but it's good to say.
I think we have to say, you know, there's a reason to have multiple open source projects looking at fairly focused areas. You know, it makes sense to begin with to actually investigate and experiment, and sometimes it makes sense to try again. So it's understandable that you'll see open source projects sort of aiming at the same thing over and over again. But when you find you've got 10 or 15 projects and they're all basically trying to, you know, configure a network card, maybe we've gone a little bit overboard at that point.
Perhaps. So open source is definitely eating the world. There's no doubt. I mean, you can listen to the keynotes. You've been hearing this message for a while. We're not the first ones to say that. It's also been eating the networking world as well to some extent. Open source is definitely pretty involved there as well. So a pragmatic view of open source networking. So before we talk about the different projects and we look at the useful, the broken, and the scrap heap, you know, it's pretty good to be clear about why we involve ourselves in open source networking projects. Open source in general, right? So we contribute to a project, others contribute to it with common goals, and everyone's problem is solved sooner.
Yeah.
It's utopia.
And it's important to understand every single point there, right? We contribute to a project. We don't keep things to ourselves. And we do it as early as possible so that everybody can see what we're up to. And others contribute to a project with common goals. So the important thing there is they're actually contributing and they want the same thing. If they come along and say, this project would be great if only it was doing something entirely different, then you haven't got the common goals and all you will end up with is a fight in public. And everybody's problem is solved sooner because you've got more people doing what you need.
Right. So when do we move on from one project to the next? Because that has to happen sometimes too. Could be. So where do you start? Where do you start? So we at least I've done a slide like this before. This is kind of an updated version. Certainly I forgot something. I apologize if I forgot your favorite open source networking project, or if I put an old project on there that you're offended by. Either way. But there's a lot. There's a lot of open source networking projects. They span foundations. They span different source code repositories. There's just a lot out there. So where do you as a user start? How do you figure out which ones of these are useful? Which ones you'd want to use? Can you deploy them? Do other people deploy them? Do the people working on them deploy them? Do they have use cases that they're trying to solve? Is it just a thin veneer for someone's ulterior motive? No one knows. You should know, though, I think, because you don't want to end up like a sad baby. I mean, that's what you could look like after you see that as well, after you look at all those slides.
Yeah, Miguel sat right there. I mean, if you want to see sad baby, then.
That's true. That's true. So it's interesting because that previous slide kind of reminds me of something else as well. It's not just open source networking, perhaps, as well. Interesting. Edge projects. I see a pattern here. I can see it. Something's happening. Seems very similar as well. Some things never change, I guess, right? We're just going to continue to proliferate the world full. But ultimately, as we said, how do we get to that utopia?
We use Google Maps. I mean,
that's how.
Yes, it should work. Might take a while, but you know.
Why not Apple Maps? I mean, it seems like it's made some progress. We could do that for sure. But we want to get to the utopia of contributing to these projects. So how do we do that? So we could look at hype cycles. I remember hype cycles were pretty important at OpenStack Summit.
It's certainly been mentioned once or twice.
Once or twice, I remember that.
But I think it's true of open source projects in general, right? It's nothing to do with OpenStack specifically, or foundations, or industries. It's just the life cycle that anything of this nature goes through. So what we get is that sort of ramp up and that peak when everybody says, oh my God, this looks so exciting. It's a new idea that I haven't thought of. We get a lot of visibility and enthusiasm.
Although you forgot where we start. The packet precipitate. We always start there, right? You have to start somewhere. So I think you've jumped ahead to...
The crest of puffed up contributions, yes, absolutely. When everybody's piling in, sometimes with no common goal as to what they're trying to achieve, which means that you tend to get some spread of diversity if you're not being careful as well.
But it's definitely fun to be in the crest of puffed up contributions. It's a fun place to be. Although eventually you might end up down in the feed box of disaffection. But don't worry, it's okay.
This is where we have to work out where things are going. I mean,
yes.
Once the hype's over and you're down to actually getting concrete work done, the contributions drop off and the interest drops off because, frankly, getting work done is not that interesting. Believe me, I'd sooner spend my days in bed. So.
Well, right. Sometimes right, exactly. The hype's gone. You're not attracting as many new contributors at this point. So what's going to happen?
But you may well be getting your job done at this point.
That's right. That has nothing to do. It could be totally useful still, right? So,
and now
the tilt of understanding
is when people start realizing that, maybe actually you're getting my job done as well. And that's when things start to pick up. And we start to see that this project is actually a useful component in, piece in my toolbox to actually deal with the day-to-day problems I get.
And then you end up with the mesa of assimilation.
And this is what we were saying earlier. This is where this just becomes an accepted part of the landscape. And it's just a thing you use without thinking about it from day to day. And then you go and look for something else to build on top that actually gets more of your job done.
It's almost the commoditization part happens here. Like you said, you don't realize that you're using it, you're still using it. So kind of like, IP route 2 or some Linux commands like that.
Yeah,
something like that.
OpenSSL, for instance.
I think that seems reasonable. So do you want to talk about this?
Well, yeah, so excitement. We love excitement, but there's excitement and there's Yes, it gets a little bit over the top sometimes. It can be very exciting. It doesn't necessarily mean you've done the right thing. It just means you've hit on a nerve. So you're aiming perhaps close to the right idea, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee that what you're doing is actually going to solve everybody's problem, right? Excitement is not writing code. Excitement is just lots of people hand-waving, running around, and getting very enthusiastic.
Definitely. So after the excitement, people may move on to other newer, more exciting projects. You know, there might be something else that comes along. Their interest in your project may fade. They're going to move on. They're going to look at something else. It doesn't mean that your project has failed or that something's wrong. It just means that, you know, you've entered this phase and you've dropped down here.
And yes, now we have to work out whether or not it's going to get to that point of sustainability. If it basically troughs out there and it turns out that you weren't doing the right thing, or you just couldn't keep people's interest because you're not doing the thing that everybody needs, then it's just going to end up sort of drifting along on that bottom. People will come, people will go, but you will never really make it out of that at that point. Alternatively, if it really does start solving people's problems and people get aware of it and start feeling the need for it, then you'll see your contributions pick up again. You'll see it won't be the heady excitement of the early days. It will simply be that you are a part of the solution at this point in time.
That's a good place to be, I think. So we thought we'd throw a few projects up here. We're not passing judgment or anything like that. We're not saying something's great. Stop smiling, Shannon. We can see you over there. It's okay. You know, we're simply trying to give a rough estimate of where some of these projects have landed. You know, you could look at P4. It seems like it's kind of climbing the hype cycle for sure. It's pretty exciting. P4 is exciting.
And if we're passing judgment, then I would say it's got great potential as well. But the point is, it's still in its early days. The hype is building. It will calm down at some point.
Definitely, definitely. You know, and then you can ride things out. OVS, DPDK, they're kind of getting towards that mesa.
Yeah,
maybe not quite there, but they're, you know, pretty solid, deployed. People are using them. Everyone's familiar with what they're doing.
Yep. And open source routing, Zebra and Quagga, we accept it as part of the landscape now. Sometimes it's the tool we want, sometimes it's the tool that we don't want. It depends, but on the other hand, it's out there and we know what it is.
We know what it is, we know what it does, it's part of the landscape, it's packaged in distributions. People are aware of it for sure. Yeah. So, you know, we described in the talk the different things, you know, useful, broken, and scrap heap. I think it helps to kind of try to describe what we want. What does it mean to be useful? So what does it mean? I mean, does it help me? When you're looking at an open source networking project, trying to determine if it's useful, it's good to ask, obviously, does it help me? Does it do what I need? Does it work? Some of these might not even work.
This is the curse of software engineers, where we all love solving problems, but we're actually not necessarily good at finding problems to solve. So if you get something that looks, you know, kind of interesting and geeky, you will go away and you will solve it and it will be brilliant at something that you don't necessarily need it to do. So the question is it rooted in the problem that you have? If it is, then it's going to be useful. If it is, and it isn't quite doing the right thing, then you can make it useful.
Can you make it useful? You have to ask yourself that. Can you fix it?
True.
Can you drive it to where you need it to go if it's not quite there?
And that much
do you
is
think
true
it will
as well.
get there? Is the community willing to go?
Yeah, how do you deal with talking to that community? Are they looking at the direction you're going, or are they sort of a little bit off course, or are they at 90 degrees? And are they the sort of people that recognize and welcome new contributors, either to code or to ideas? They're two different things, and you have to remember that both of them are relevant to this. If you can contribute ideas and you can contribute code and they will be accepted, then you can take this the place you want it to go.
Right. It helps to know the project that you're looking at, if it has a roadmap, what exactly is it trying to solve, because then that will help you to decide if it's going to solve the problem that you have as well, to be able to match that up. So the same as looking at useful, we should look at what does it mean to be broken as well. So does it have a diverse community? And what we mean by that, you know, if it has only a single committer or a small number of committers, the diversity of committers is not very good. So what does it mean when that single committer or that small number of committers go away? That might scare you to some extent. Now, on the other hand, it's open source. You could certainly fork it. You could take the code. But what if you're not capable of coding? Or you don't have developers.
It doesn't make it a bad project to have one committer, right? One committer, one person can have exactly the right idea. But if they're the only person who can fix it, and they're always going to be the only person who can fix it, and you're not going to get that value where you put in some effort and you get the effort of a lot of other people coming back to you, then that's a broken open source project. It's a project you might as well just keep in-house at that point almost.
Yes, and much like the committers, does one committer gatekeep access to all the commits, or this one's important too, demand some sort of special intellectual property rights?
Yep.
I know no one wants to think about that, but you have to look at the licensing aspects. If you're going to contribute code, you better know exactly whose rights you're giving. Are you giving away your rights, your employer's rights? Does your employer know?
Yeah.
If you're doing it while you're working for an employer, you better make sure they know.
Yeah.
They're going to want to know.
Yes, I mean, this applies to all open source projects. You've got to make sure your company agrees to you basically putting something out in the open source world, but it's not really that's the problem. The problem is when you find that what you're doing is you're assigning your rights to a company who one day is basically going to take them, close shop, or close the source back up, and then basically build a product. Right, so what I'm doing is effectively for free, I'm working for a third-party company who's then going to start, maybe even competing with mine company. It's not the right answer. So we've seen this in the community. The best projects here are the ones with a strictly open source license, which basically say everybody gets equal rights to the code, whatever those rights would be.
Right, definitely, yeah. And does the community value your contributions? Is it going in the right direction? I mean, these are things we've kind of touched on. You want to make sure that those are right as well. So the last one, what does it mean to be on the scrap heap when we talk about that? It could mean that the project has run its course and it's no longer useful. So this would be a project that someone set out to try to solve a problem. For whatever reason, the problem wasn't well defined perhaps, or perhaps the problem is no longer valid. The project's been going on for 5 years, and it turns out we don't even need to solve that problem anymore. Project is now on the scrap heap.
Mm-hmm. Or alternatively, the problem that they tried to solve, either it didn't exist or it doesn't exist. Sometimes it takes a while to realize that, a project was off course and it was trying to solve something that turns out to be unhelpful. Or alternatively, the problem changes over the course of time. And in networking, that certainly happens, right? We come up with new protocols, we come up with different speeds. If I'm optimizing, how to use a 10 megabit link in a data center, then possibly at this point, my time has passed and I should start looking at something new. So it's quite reasonable that what they were trying to do is no longer a thing that matters to us.
Right, or it could mean to be to be on the scrap heap also. Maybe developers have left the project, they've moved on.
Yeah.
So there's not as many developers, maybe there's no developers. They've moved on because they themselves have just moved to different things. So all of that could be possible as well. So now I think we'd like to take a look at how do you choose projects that aren't broken or on the scrap heap. How would you go about doing that as well? I think the first thing to look at when you're looking at that, you want to contribute to one of these projects, you're going to use it for something, look at culture. Culture is definitely important for these projects. And by culture, we mean things like how easy is it to contribute to the project? Can you just push a GitHub pull request? Make sure you check that licensing agreement before you do that, right? But can you do it that way? Is there a code of conduct? That's also important. At some point, you're going to run into bad actors in these communities. Does the project have a code of conduct? Do they have a way to handle that type of situation? Because if not, that's going to be uncomfortable for everyone involved.
Yeah.
You're going to have to deal with it on the fly, and it's going to end poorly.
Yeah, and then does it have downtime? I mean, the factor here is that what we're looking at is a community of people helping each other. But if you end up basically the person everybody calls for the minor problems 24/7, then you've basically signed up for a lifetime, and you've probably signed up for a lifetime of misery unless you don't actually sleep. So you've got to figure out how this distributes between people, how you can be both the right kind of participant, so that when you need help, you go to someone who can actually help you, and you kind of work out when it's your job to do a bit of discovery and when it's your job to actually just pile in and ask a question. But similarly, you've got to be answering questions, and you've got to understand that answering questions is a job you can't do 24/7. So that balance is one that you can see in the project by just looking at how it works today.
Yeah, because burnout is definitely real. I think we've all experienced it. If you look, you can see plenty of articles written by open source maintainers where they've completely burned out. They have gotten to the point where they've had to abandon the project because it's affected their health. So definitely don't get to that point. And don't look at a project that you're looking to contribute to. Look if its maintainer is at that point. Are they going to burn out?
And then is it dominated by a single source of commits? And this comes back to that diversity of committers, of participants. If it's dominated by a single source of commits, you've got a couple of things to look at. One is, if they stop paying attention to this project, does the project basically dry up because that was 90% of the source of changes and improvements? But the other one, also important, is sometimes when you get a single source of commits, and by this I mean a community or a company or whatever, have they basically set it up so that they've got favored status when it comes to committing stuff? Can they commit low quality code where they demand yours to be impeccable? That kind of thing is deeply frustrating, I say, as someone who's been in that situation in the past. It needs to be, everybody needs to be held to a high standard, and everybody needs to be held to the same high standard.
Yep, definitely. So you're looking at a project again, you want to make sure, you want to find a useful one. Does it do what I want and also what I need as well? How useful is the project to you? Is it going to solve your problems? Oh, is it ready to be deployed and used? Is that possible? And how would you go about doing that? Is the project in development? Is it moving in the direction I want? I mean, clearly it's being worked on, but look at the roadmap maybe, or whatever roadmap is available. See if it's going in that direction that you want it to go to solve your problem.
Yes, and pick that, try and place that project in your head on that curve that we drew earlier, right? Do we understand whether it's in the fluff cycle or whether it's actually settled down to being a mature product? Do we understand when that's going to happen? Can we predict that? Can we figure out whether it's going, roughly in the right direction, solidly in the right direction, whether that's something we can adjust? And how quickly does it release new code? Something that's basically shipping out trustworthy code only once a year is probably not going to solve your immediate problems.
Yeah, release and versioning. The most important thing about a project is repeatability. So knowing that chunk of code tied to that version number, that seems like a trivial item, but it turns out it's really important. You really want to know that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've seen in open source projects is they've no sense of pinning down a version. You should always take the head of the trunk, because the master copy, the one that's just been committed, is always the best code. Well, that's our CI/CD wish list, certainly, but it's not practically true. You need to know that this thing is doing the job that you do, and you sometimes need to pick a stable release that's got a bit more long-term support on it. We're not trying to throw in every new feature every 5 days. We're just trying to settle to something that's working. And again, the testing matters here, right? Testing on every commit gets me a master that's stable enough that I can develop on, usually. That's what it's aiming to do. But testing on release usually wants to be a little bit more in-depth if what you're trying to do is a long-term stable release.
Kind of leads us right into this, which I think you talked a lot about here as well. So one thing that we will bring up, maybe worth, because you kind of talked to this slide already, jumping ahead a little there, but bonus points, does your project test against across repositories or with other projects as well?
Plenty of examples of that in particularly this summit, because OpenStack is lots and lots of individual projects that together make OpenStack. And OpenStack understands this, and they basically build a test infrastructure that brings all of these things together. But what you're going to see in networking is very, very similar, right? When I'm doing networking, maybe I'm reprogramming devices, maybe I'm playing with BGP. I need to work out whether I can use these things consistently together. And if I can't, then it's going to all fall apart. So if somebody's been doing these testing for me upstream, then that gives me some confidence that we're getting there.
I think so. So I think this is actually interesting, right? So to figure this out, you always want to look at your problems that you have as well. The top of that would be the ones that you thought mattered.
Oh yes, and the bottom of that, and there's a lot more of it, are the ones that you discover on the way to getting this out of the door and running for your production. A whole bunch more things mattered than you ever thought of up front.
Than you ever thought of, exactly. So contributing to open source networking, being part of the solution rather than being part of the problem as well. So we'll walk through this pretty quickly as well. Some examples.
The good and the bad, basically.
The good and the bad, exactly. You can
Are you bad or am I bad? Oh, that's tricky.
I think I'm good now.
Well, I'm an evil twin, so I can do that.
I think that works, right? So you want to contribute so it's like a nice little pristine beach scene rather than being slammed against the rocks, I think. I come across and I would like to contribute to your project, and I'm looking for help. How do I contribute? Please help me.
But I come along and I basically say, oh, well, no, you're just making this difficult for me.
Which is what I'd expect from you.
Well, yeah, I mean, But yeah, the difference is really in approach. It's just you have to understand you are asking for help. You're asking to join in, and you're asking for other people to do some of the work, hopefully, that you don't have to do because they're doing it at the same time. If you jump in and you say, oh, this is hard, or alternatively, I know everything and you just need to do exactly what I say, none of that's going to work.
And that makes it challenging for sure. So, now we're walking along. So I found a bug. I was pretty excited. I found a bug in your code, so.
Yeah, no, it's just broken. I'm sorry, it's broken.
Yeah, I know. It seems like it's always broken as well. So all of these projects have bug trackers. All of these projects have some way to track the fact that you found a bug. Make sure that you include relevant information when you file the bug. Hardware is interesting as well in terms of networking, what you might have found, networking topologies. And then the other key is wait. These different projects have different ways that they will respond to bug requests. Again, it goes back to burnout. You're dealing with an open source project. Yep. Likely a lot of the people are being funded by their companies, but still,
yep.
You file a bug and
they're being funded by
2 a.m. Pacific, and the developers are,
asleep,
perhaps, not even in that time zone, likely.
Yeah.
You're going to have to wait.
Yeah, and bear in mind here, you are getting exactly the quantity of support you paid for, which is that much.
Yes.
Right? You can buy them a beer on occasion. That certainly gets you beneficial treatment, but you're not paying their wages. So, you can ask, people will help. They are nice people. They're trying to participate in this community just like you are for the same reasons that you are. But they're not about to jump on your bug because it happens to be critical to your production. So you have to understand how you deal with urgent problems in much the same way as you would deal with internal urgent problems.
Correct. So now I found a bug and I also have a fix for the bug.
You're just not merging my code. My code is great. It's the best code you've ever seen. Why would you not merge it?
It never, I think the point with this one is, great, you found a bug and also you have a fix, but make sure you follow the process. Each of these projects is going to have a different way of getting code merged, what their CI is. They're going to respond differently. Make sure that you respond to comments on the code that you push.
I mean, modern development generally involves running through a review process, and a review process is a form of testing in a way. It's basically saying, is this code human readable by other humans, which is why you can't do it for yourself. And so what you need to do is pay close attention to your patch in the CI queue, because it will pass the test and then it will sit there and wait for a human being to say whether it makes the blindest bit of sense to them. You need that. You can't give it for yourself. You can't demand that people just accept it because it's taking a little while for a reviewer to get it. But make sure that you're at least making sure that it's good for every other reason than a human being when it gets into the review queue.
Oh, so now I have a fancy new feature. And guess what? It's based on an IETF draft.
Oh, yes.
Those are the best.
No, but you have to build it. I mean, it's based on the latest IETF draft. You have to do it.
How could I not? How could I not? So, if you're going to implement something bigger than a bug fix, you have a giant feature for this project, obviously you want to make sure it aligns with where the project's going. Is it within the scope of the project? It might not be. Maybe it's a different project.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something orthogonal.
This is basically the difference between saying, I think this is why we should do it, and I'm willing to do it, and saying, here is 2 million lines of code. It's all good.
Trust me.
Trust me.
Yep.
Right? You need people to give you the feedback up front so that if it's just slightly in the wrong direction, they can fix it right there and then. If you basically give them the pile of code, it's going to take forever for them to discover the problem.
It's difficult for sure. So, hey, look at that. I have a project idea, maybe more than a feature. Let's figure out how we can, work together to address those common goals as well.
Yes, absolutely. I have a project idea too, and it should be your project. That project you thought was your project, it's not what it's supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be doing this instead.
Oh my goodness, that doesn't sound good. So evaluate your project idea. Can it fit? Again, this is what we've been talking about. Does it overlap? Does it provide extra value? Is it something that can be abstracted out? Can you add some abstractions in at the cost of perhaps some performance that might be beneficial?
Yeah,
or
it can be a completely separate idea, but you have to figure out whether you and everybody else in this project, if you're being sympathetic, can actually make use of this. Does it merge into this? Does it add a little bit of extra value, or even quite a lot of extra features? Or alternatively, is it best done separately?
So open source networking, it's very strategic to my company, and I'd like to use it in one of my internal projects as well.
Yeah, we plan to use open source projects, but we have absolutely no intention of participating.
Yeah, evaluate, right? So in your case then, I don't know, you're not going to get all the benefits that you might get. But evaluate the Upstream project and how you can integrate it. Again, we're kind of saying the same thing, but make sure that you understand if the project fits where you're going as well. Ooh, I want to start a whole new open source networking project. That's exciting.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what we should do is talk about it a lot, because talking is far more important than actually writing code.
Yeah, well, you could argue that maybe that's not the case, right? Focus on quality over splashy presentations. It might sound ironic since you're all listening to a splashy presentation, but it's true, right? You know, clearly, so you're starting a new project. Clearly write down what the project is going to do. Not everyone can listen to what's in your head, and they don't understand what you're thinking all the time.
Absolutely, and frankly, slides are not the best way of explaining what a project does in detail. They're fine for giving a taster of what it's going to do, and you will want to talk to people about this, and you will want to get the idea out there to form a community. But on the other hand, it's far more important that you write down what you intend to do and why you intend to do it, so that people can actually do a concrete evaluation of where this is where they want to spend their lifetime.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to quickly go through and compare open source contributions, how you would do that. I know we're running short on time here, so we'll go through this really quick. We just picked 3 relatively recent open source networking projects, FDIO, VPP, Istio, and Calico.
This is just a quick sampler of how you contribute and how they work. And a lot of cases, they're basically straightforward.
Yes.
These are fairly typical. We're looking at a mailing list. There's nearly always a mailing list involved. A quick communication channel. That varies a little. Sometimes it's IRC, sometimes it's Slack. There are a few other exceptions.
Sometimes it's both.
Yes, and meetings are often, there are often other things, periodic weekly meetings, sometimes on IRC, sometimes on a teleconference. It works both ways.
Could be both as well. Same with infrastructure and docs. We've put some links in on where the projects are hosted. You know, sometimes they use Garrett, sometimes they use GitHub, sometimes they're mirrored into multiple different places. You might get it at GitHub even though the development isn't done there.
Yeah, read the new contributors docs when you can. Yes. When it becomes a little bit difficult to read the new contributors docs, well done. You just found a bug and you flag it. So try and get somebody to recognize it's there and even help out. Say, this is what I needed to hear and I didn't understand that.
And speaking about bugs, you know, where do you go if you want to file a bug for these particular projects? This is where, how are they going to be tracked? Any notes about them if they have instructions or things like that as well. So you want to add a feature. How would you do that? Typically, you're going to have to start a discussion on a mailing list, typically on a mailing list if you want to add a feature. Processes
vary. I mean, if you're in a OpenStack world, you'll be possibly committing a spec and getting it through a review process. But mailing list is a good place to have a discussion even then.
I think so. Projects evolution as well. You know, where did these get started? Where have they evolved to? Are they part of a foundation as well, or whatever is there? Bonus points and homework if you go look at the Calico CLA for fun after the talk. So we're almost done here. Practical advice on succeeding upstream. We're kind of going to summarize this. Pick the correct project. Right? Everyone wants the more animated, 3D looking, cartoony SpongeBob rather than that one as well. Make sure that you're always planning ahead. Always plan ahead. Figure out what's going to happen. If you're open sourcing a new project, what's going to happen when you no longer want to work on it? What is going to happen? You need to figure out that what your company or your organization is going to do when you don't want to work on it. That's the part everyone forgets.
Yes, respect and diversity in our community. Make sure your community is not, you know, single source, not a single person, but there are a lot of people, so that the ideas get validation. You know, someone with a different viewpoint can tell you whether your idea looks like it's sane or completely insane, and you need that to succeed. Curb your ego. You have to remember here that you and everybody else is trying to solve a problem. When they say they don't agree with you, they don't agree with you for reasons. Try and understand their reasons. You are not right just because you're you. Right? And then, you know, make sure that you help others. There's always going to be new people that don't understand the process. If you've been working with the project, for example, you might be ingrained into how it works, other people aren't, and vice versa. You know, so make sure that we're all helping each other out. There's enough negativity going around. Let's not spread it in open source as well. And really, the little things do matter. Code, obviously important. Documentation, infrastructure, helping new people out. These are all important things as well. So let's not forget those little things as well. And then obviously just make sure if you're here, you have open source developers, make sure you're empowering them as well so that they can be successful. And a lot of what we've talked about is how you can do that as well. So finally, just make sure you be excellent to each other. We may have left like 30 seconds for questions. Otherwise, you can talk to us afterwards.
Great stuff.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone.